Hello! I haven't done one of these for a while and I'm getting sick of the number of audiobooks I'm reading, listening to without thinking about or marking in any way. And so I thought I'd do one of these. So today I'm doing a book called The Spinoza Problem by Irvin Yalom. He's an author that I have previously reviewed another book of his, which was called When Nietzsche Wept, and that was also very interesting. So what I'll do is I'll do the thing I usually do, which is talk about the book in general terms, give you an overview of it, give you my general thoughts on it, some of the things that worked well and made it interesting, and then maybe I'll mention after a warning if there's anything that's spoilerish before I go down to anything that might be considered a spoiler. So this is a book by Irvin Yalom. Irvin Yalom is a distinguished psychiatrist and psychotherapist. He's still alive at the time of recording. I think he's in his 90s, and I hear that he's still seeing patients, albeit not very many of them. But that speaks to the fact that he's got all his faculties, and certainly in terms of my experience of him through the books of his that I've read or listened to, is that he's a really interesting thinker, and I imagine he would be a really good psychotherapist as well. As you can see, my baby Wilfie here also agrees and thinks he would be a wonderful psychotherapist if he had need of one. So, The Spinoza Problem, it's a fiction. It's a fictional story set in two different timelines. One timeline follows Spinoza, the famous philosopher. I say famous, though I didn't really know anything about him. I'd heard the name, but I didn't know who he was or what his contribution to philosophy was. But so one part of the book follows his life, and really in this critical juncture in his life, and the other thread is set over a longer time span, I would say, and is about someone called Alfred Rosenberg, who was someone who was, and this probably isn't a spoiler because it's historic record, someone who was executed at Nuremberg after World War II for his part in Nazi war crimes. So he was someone who was high up in the Nazi party, who was involved in propaganda and organising the Nazi effort and philosophy, and so that's why he was executed. But so the second timeline in the story follows his life from when he's a young man, from when he's about 16 or 17 at college, and then through various seminal periods of his life, and eventually meeting Hitler and the Nazi party, and then how things progress there. So you've got these two timelines that inform one another, because the at the center of the story is, well, first of all, Spinoza and what he represented. So Spinoza was Jewish. He was a Jew living in Amsterdam at a time when there was a lot of persecution everywhere in Europe, and particularly in Spain and Portugal, and lots of Jews were fleeing those places and coming to Amsterdam, which was relatively tolerant. But Spinoza had lots and lots of questions, and the rabbis in his community and other people of standing didn't like those questions, and didn't like the answers that he gave to those questions. They didn't, did they, Wilfie? And so, because of his questioning attitude towards religion and God, and because of his view that really that you might believe in God, but it's ridiculous to believe that the Torah is the literal word of God, that the events of the Old Testament were, you know, actual and literal. He, for example, points out internal inconsistencies and talks about how a lot of the instruction is just to cement power structures in the church, and of course this is really dangerous thought at that time. And so it's, to some extent, it's not surprising that he had a lot of the community turning against him, and he was excommunicated. And then, so the story is his life story, and it's a narrative invention that's based on some historical facts. Wilfie's very quick to point out that it's not an entirely true story, are you, Wilfie? No, so it's not entirely true, but it's a reconstruction of the way things may have been. And so you've got that story going on, and then meanwhile you've got Rosenberg, and this is where the name comes from, the Spinoza problem. So in the Second World War, as Germany was expanding, the Nazi party took power and then expanded across Europe, and one of the things they did was they plundered Europe. They plundered great works of art, as well as things that were more literally valuable, like gold, but they had an eye for art as well. And Hitler, of course, was a failed painter, amongst other things, and had an eye for these things, wanted to possess them. And Rosenberg was someone who was put in charge of some of these operations, and went into the Netherlands and plundered these works of art. And one of the places he plundered was the Spinoza Museum, and he took all these works of these documents and books, his library. And if my understanding is correct, there's documents originating from Rosenberg talking about the Spinoza problem. And so what the book postulates, it kind of tries to explain this obsession with Spinoza, and really it couches it in terms of Rosenberg sees himself as a philosopher. He sees himself as someone who is very intelligent and has understood horrible things to do with race purity and all that horrible stuff that the Nazis were so fond of, and yet all these great Germans that he idolizes, like Goethe, themselves idolized Spinoza. And when he reads Spinoza and understands Spinoza, he kind of sees why, because Spinoza's talking about the lies that are often spun in religions, and the Nazis, of course, want to abolish religion. And so, yeah, what's that, Wilfie? I think he was looking at an aeroplane, maybe. And so Rosenberg's trying to understand that, and Rosenberg's story is really interesting. It's kind of framed with these encounters with a fictional character who is a childhood friend of Rosenberg, who has become a doctor and then become an adherent of this new type of medicine called psychiatry and the talking cure. And so much of Rosenberg's part of the story, it's interspersed with these episodes of basically psychoanalysis with this psychotherapist, which is a theme you can clearly see in the author's work. Clearly is coming at things from the point of view of a psychotherapist. But it's a really interesting way of interrogating and understanding a character and looking at the internal conflicts, even if they're like postulated and imagined internal conflicts. So it's a great way of illuminating, having a guess at illuminating what was going on in this guy's mind as he's doing these terrible things. So that's the plot, the story in a nutshell. And Wilfie clearly really enjoyed it. He's singing in baby language about, well, he's giving you a description just as I did, but it's in the language of babies. So if you have any babies, let them have a look at this video and maybe they'll find it interesting also. But in terms of my reaction to the book. I really enjoyed it. Really swept me up, carried me along. Lots of interesting history which I wasn't aware of, particularly with Spinoza in Amsterdam in, I don't know, the 1500s, something like that. And well written, engaging, but not to the point where the language is, it's not like the language is really beautiful, elaborate language. It's kind of clear, understandable, elegant language, and the story is well told and approachable, with some interesting philosophical ideas, some interesting ideas relating to psychotherapy and psychiatry. And of course there's an element of that which maybe I found that more interesting because of being a GP myself, and so there's, not that I'm a psychiatrist, but there's an element of interest from kind of a mental health point of view, and minds and healing minds and things like that. I said I was going to give spoilers, didn't I? But I can't think of anything that's really a spoiler that's worth saying. I don't think it's that kind of a book, really. It's just this exploration of character and history, and of these interesting characters. And you know, you've got this polarity, I suppose, between the openness, the lightness of Spinoza, and the darkness, the broken, poisoned, ultimately unredeemable life of Rosenberg. So, you know, that's really fascinating, and then it's the theme of freedom and being able to question. And of course, you weren't able to question things under Nazi rule any more than Spinoza was able to question the customs and mores and traditions of his time under the kind of the Jewish rule in the Jewish subculture in Holland at that time. So yeah, really interesting book. I really enjoyed it. I'd really recommend it. Let me know what you thought. If you have any questions or thoughts, or if I got anything wrong, please let me know in the comments below. And yeah, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. If you are interested, as I always say, I've got a number of books I've written myself. You can look on my website, www.jamiebrindle.com. I've got a book free that you can download. There's lots of short stories you can have a look at. There's lots of micro stories that take less than a minute to read. So if you did enjoy this, do me a favor, maybe read one of my tiny stories. Spend 30 seconds on that if you feel like it. Anyway, all the best. Bye bye.